I have surprising news, chat. Very surprising news. Unite the Union has done something. They've actually done something. I mean, obviously, Unite the Union fight very well for their members. We've seen lots of excellent pay settlements being won by Unite the Union negotiators, and that's good. But on a large-scale level, what Unite the Union have basically been doing the entirety of the time Keir Starmer's been leader of the Labour Party is that they've just essentially been writing angry letters to Keir Starmer. How dare you do the things we don't like? We will send you another angry letter if you don't stop. Which of course did nothing, because that's not leverage, that's just writing letters, which Keir Starmer clearly has shown he's very happy to continue to ignore, despite the repeated warnings about putting Labour on notice, final warnings over and over and over again from Sharon Graham. Unite have actually buckled up and done something good for once. They've finally decided to actually put the money where their mouth is and start taking Labour to task in real material terms. So Unite have launched a Red Wall campaign in a push for radical Labour policies. So they're taking what was being told, as far as Sharon Graham is concerned, money that would have been spent on the Labour Party, and launching a grassroots campaign in industrial constituencies in the Red Wall, specifically, demanding energy nationalisation, an industrial strategy on steel, and a Green New Deal investment for new jobs on there as well. Okay? So Unite's leader, Sharon Graham, who has been publicly critical of Keir Starmer, with very many angry letters and final warnings, said funding earmarked for Labour would instead be funnelled into a stoking public pressure for the party to shift its position on key issues including energy nationalisation. Now this is really good, right? This is the only way that you can hold the current Labour Party to account, because the only thing that they care about is whether or not they can get themselves elected. All they care about is getting elected, and so they will essentially shift their position to whatever they think the most electable position is. And so what you have to do is you have to agitate in the constituencies that they care about, the swing constituencies. So as far as they're concerned with the Red Wall, why do you think all of this red meat policy is coming from to win back these Red Wall votes? The best way of shifting Labour's position is forcing them to adopt the positions that are asked for by the people in the swing constituencies. So this is actually really good use of their funding as far as their political fund is concerned to try and shift Labour on policy, because internal party stuff isn't working. They've already said they don't want to disaffiliate. Clearly the final warnings and the angry letters that they've written to the Labour leadership have done absolutely nothing to shift Labour on policy. But this material difference to what Labour won, which is to win the election by attacking swing seats, attacking Red Wall seats they're desperate to win back, by saying, why would you support Labour if you're not wanting these specific policies? Great. Perfect way of being able to shift the Overton window and using the funds for good. Really glad to see that's what they've been doing. Indeed, yeah, Unite has finally grown a backbone. Damo, if you're watching, this is right up your alleyway, considering how critical you've been of Unite, and well critical, with good reason to be critical of Unite. I've been critical of Unite. This is gonna be the kind of thing that Damo definitely wants to hear. What we are doing is we are diverting some of the money that we would have probably given to Labour to have 3 major campaigns that we are starting in the Red Wall seats, where these issues of for those constituents, because I mean, people in these seats do support these things, and there are loads of people that the Labour Party want to get on board to vote for them. And if you create this red line of, well, if you're not going to do this green jobs investment or this industrial strategy for steel or this energy nationalisation, then you've lost our support. And when the Labour Party is only caring about winning votes of people and not about the utility of the policy, in which case you've got to make sure that people only vote for policy that has positive utility. So I think this is a good plan. And make sure that it's issues for the constituents that matter under first past the post as well. There'll be billboards, there's wraparounds, there'll be one-to-one conversations. So when they come into these towns, people will be saying that's what's important to them. And if Labour don't pick up the baton up, I think that will be difficult for them. Again, good strategy. Very, very good strategy. Unite still pays significant affiliation fees to the Labour, amounting to almost 1.1 million in 2023 so far. But Graham said additional resources from the union's political fund would now go into campaigning on specific policies. She cited energy nationalisation, oil and gas, where Unite wants Labour to reverse its decision not to grant new North Sea licences, and government support for steelmaking. Well, I disagree with not granting new North Sea licences. But I guess if you are actually going to issue these licences that have been promised by the Conservatives, they should be issued to a publicly owned drilling company rather than the private sector. But this is something I disagree on, the idea that we need to be continuing to ramp up fossil fuel production during a climate crisis. But Clearly, Unite have got to look out for their members, as do GMB and people like that. But steelmaking, absolutely great, happy with that. And she's already clearly in this article already being shown to be caring about wanting Green New Deal jobs in these constituencies as well, manufacturing and engineering and new productive energy jobs in the green sector, which is great. This is what we need public investment for, and they need to be publicly owned and publicly funded. In Wales and Scunthorpe, there's 16 steel towns where we are taking our policies to the people of those towns and saying, whoever comes in here needs to give this commitment to steel. Unite is calling for Labour to allocate some of its $28 billion a year of green investment funds to greening the steel industry and promise to use British steel in all public infrastructure schemes. Similarly, the union will target Scottish constituencies where there are oil and gas workers, calling for energy nationalisation and a continuation of North Sea extraction until workers can move into new green jobs through a just transition. Okay, if that's the position that she's taken, then I think I can get on board with that. If it's energy, if it's nationalised, I'll take it. Because again, if you nationalise, it'd be easier to do the transition as well. I don't think there's a family in Scotland that's not connected to the oil and gas industry. I'm not saying vote Labour, vote Tory, vote this or vote that. I'm saying this is a core issue and you want to shift the party consensus on what voters want, because both parties are going to be chasing, actually loads of different parties will specifically be chasing what voters want, right? We've all seen from Labour, they just move to wherever the public consensus is. So if you can't give money to Labour to change that consensus because they won't back it, you've got to change the political consensus and then hope Labour and other parties as well follow suit too. Because if you want to make sure that you're not being the Labour specific union, which Unite have always been up to this point, you can say, this isn't about Labour. This is about the broader electorate and changing viewpoints, and then whether or not Labour or Conservatives win, they will have to pander to these viewpoints that are important to the public. Somebody asked me the other day, how will you move Keir Starmer on these issues? For me, it's the electorate. They're the decision makers. That is the reality. And so if the electorate moves, he moves. It's as simple as that. Exactly what I've been saying. In a speech to union delegates at TUC, Graham conceded that renationalising energy, including the national grid, would cost $90 billion, but insisted a future Labour government could afford it. And I think the grid is the important bit, and new energy projects that feed into the grid. You can let the private sector deal with cleaning up the mess of the fossil fuel industry later on, whilst incentivising the government to invest in new green jobs. Some of Labour's green policies, spearheaded by the Shadow Energy Secretary Ed Miliband, have proved controversial with trade unions representing oil and gas workers. Some fear their members could face the fate of the coal miners in the 80s unless a shift away from fossil fuels is carefully managed. The GMB shares Unite's scepticism about halting North Sea oil licences, but its Gensec, Gary Smith, said he would continue to make that case directly to Starmer. Labour are just wrong on this, they're wrong on oil and gas, and we will continue to argue and debate on it. Many of whose members work in the energy sector from GMB rejected the idea of nationalisation, however, because of course GMB reject the idea of nationalisation. GMB is the worst union. It's so awful. They're like Usdaw levels of melt. There is an argument for public ownership of some parts of strategic infrastructure, but the idea we're ever going to renationalise retail energy is nonsense. There's not a lot of money in it. He said, pointing to the fact that some energy providers have recently had to be bailed out. Well, if they're going to get bailed out, just nationalise them anyway. If we're spending public money to bail them out, then nationalise them anyway. Who owns the grid? Yes, National Grid Incorporated, yeah. They also own, electricity grids in places like Canada as well. It's a big company now. Is that GMB are the worst union? They're not as bad as Usdaw. Usdaw are the worst union, but GMB are pretty scabby. GMB did that big deal where they undercut Independent Workers Union on creating a chummy bosses deal with Deliveroo for gig economy workers in food delivery. IWGB were doing their own deal with trying to get Deliveroo drivers organised, and GMB just completely overrode them. It was and with the in league with the bosses as well. It was really dirty stuff. You're in Unite. Do they smell too? I mean, they're fine. All of the unions have their problems. I would never tell anybody to leave a union because the leadership is bad or they have the wrong opinion of the Labour Party. There are more things more important than electoral politics. And whilst I believe that Usdaw is full of centrist types and GMB are happy to make bad deals with bosses instead of looking after their members, at the end of the day, it's necessary to be in a union for the benefits that being in a union confers, and letting electoral politics, like macro politics get in the way of the incredibly important part, which is ensuring that your workplace is unionised and you have the protection of a union. That's more important to me. Unite irked some delegates at the TUC's annual gathering by publicly attacking some of Labour's policies. When most of the unions affiliated to the party have been publicly supportive, in particular on a raft of workers' rights measures reaffirmed by the deputy leader, Angela Rayner. Except the things like banning 0 hours contracts and sick pay from day one have already been walked back. They've already been walked back. It was 3 days. Angela Rayner gave a speech on the 12th saying that there would be sick pay from day one and there would be a banning of 0 hours contracts. And 3 days later, the NPF document comes out saying that it will not be sick pay from day one and that there'll be the option to opt into 0 hours contracts anyway. So they didn't get rid of the 0 hours contracts. They've U-turned on that in 3 days. And they've also U-turned on day one sick pay after 3 days. It must be incredibly humiliating to be Angela Rayner, being invited up to the big kids table, to the adults table, being part of the adults in the room. As far as they're concerned, she's still on the crank side because she's to the left of Gerhard Schroeder. And being invited up to the adults table, and every single time you sit down to eat your food, having the chair pulled out from under you. She must have a public humiliation kink. It's honestly, why does she do it to herself over and over and over again? Because her speech at the TUC was great. It was a good speech. And then she's like, we've got sick pay from day one. We've got a banning of 0 hours contracts. And then the NPF and all of the Starmer cronies like, haha, lol, no. And she'll get blamed for it. She'll get blamed as if it's her U-turn rather than something that's been forced upon her by the kind of Starmer Central Committee. Incredible, incredible. Yeah, you did tell me it was a stitch-up, Jim Speak. Plenty of people in chat at the time were telling me that we should never believe any of the pledges that Labour's written. And, of course, they were unbelievable. And Angela Rayner was the absolute fall guy for it. Made to look like a gigantic mug and very embarrassing. Sharon Graham has accused Labour of watering down aspects to the package, including unions' access to workplaces, blaming corporate lobbying. Most of these policies cost no money, it's not financial, so it was done for a different reason, and I was assuming it was done for business. And we know that that's true. Rachel Reeves said she wanted to bring private companies in on policy making. We've seen the U-turns on the financial tax on big tech after meeting with Google completely coincidentally. We've seen U-turns on all of these things as their funding model has changed from union donations and membership subscriptions to big donations from wealthy individuals, right? We've seen their policy change as the donations have rolled in, so I don't think Sharon is wrong in her assessment there. We have put a lot of money into Labour through the bad times. They weren't in government, so we've got nothing for it. And then, of course, the business lobby show up late for the party, and of course it's we've got to be careful. She also urged Starmer's party to take a more radical approach on issues including tax and spending policy, a view shared by some other unions. If they're too cautious, I think it'll be a problem, because I think people are crying out for something. Graham's predecessor as Unite GenSec, Len McCluskey, was closely involved in Labour politics during Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, etc. But she's deliberately taken a more arm's-length approach. I mean, she said she wanted to get back into the workplace rather than continually be in support of the Labour Party as like a political union in that sense. And so I think this divestment from Labour towards political campaigning that's not Labour affiliated is a good move. Unite gave Labour $3.5 million in the run-up to 2019, making it the biggest contributor. I'm sure we'll have discussions. Why would we give them any money if we didn't want them to win? Of course we want them to win, but we can't just put a blank check into Central Labour and say, do with it as you will, when the very issues we're trying to get them to agree on, they're not agreeing to. Labour has been recruiting new donors among business leaders in recent months, and it seeks alternative sources of funding. A Labour spokesperson said a Labour government will change the lives of working people for the better, and everything we do is focused on that, except not going to say how. Apart from just saying strengthening workers' rights and tackling insecure work by not banning 0 hours contracts and not giving day one sick pay. But again, there's fine stuff in their work assessment. It's just the humiliation of continually rowing back on pledges 3 days later, 3 days after their announcement at the TUC conference, and they instantly get abandoned. It makes them look really unprofessional and not like a party of government, because of course, we all know that is a real fantasy for a bunch of Blairites who have the delusions of grandeur. And I'm glad that, Unite have finally got their act together. It took ages. It took months and years of badgering Unite about their failure to hold Labour to account for them to actually take their political fund and do something with it that might actually shift the goalposts. So for once on this channel, I will say well done, Unite. That's some good policy. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider liking and subscribing. It does help out the channel and the algorithm. And if you click the bell notification icon, it will let you know when I go live and when I upload videos. If you'd like to follow me on social media, my handle is @NoJusticeMTG, and that is Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, and YouTube. If you want to support my channel in a more financial manner, you can do so by becoming a member for just 99p, by super chatting, or by supporting me on Patreon, with the link is in the description of this video. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next segment.